Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Today we start our series on MS, and I'm super excited because I love learning about MS. I think it's such an interesting diagnosis, and I feel we're just going to learn a lot. If not, we're just going to refresh our minds with the information about this diagnosis. So let's start talking about MS. And to begin, I just want to describe or share that multiple sclerosis pretty much means multiple scars. So there are 6 constructs that I need you to understand and I need you to know about MS. The first one is that it is a chronic disease. So this disease does not have a cure. And it's going to last a lifetime. And also it's going to progress over a lifetime. So that's the first construct about MS. The second one is that it's going to affect the central nervous system. And with this one, here we are in a place that if it affects the central nervous system, meaning any place in the spinal cord or the brain, then the symptoms will be highly variable because any area in the entire central nervous system can be a possible target. So anywhere from the spinal cord to the cortex to the brainstem to the cerebellum, any area could be a target for MS. So any central nervous system symptoms can be possible with MS. So you never know what you're gonna get with MS. This disease, third construct, is highly variable. So I've heard if you see a person with MS, you will see one person with MS. So highly variable, highly heterogeneous disease because any area could be a target. So we never know what we're going to get. We cannot stereotype the symptoms like, let's say, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, MS, not the case, okay? The next one, it is demyelinating. And if we remember and we know what myelin is, which I hope we all do, it is the covering on the axon, right? So what does that mean? What does it mean that's demyelinating? So we know the myelin covering on the axons in the central nervous system. We also have myelin in our peripheral nervous system, but here we're talking about central nervous system only, okay? So we know that the cells that create the myelin in the central nervous system are the oligodendrocytes. So in MS, there is destruction of the oligodendrocytes. So when you lose the covering around the axons, you lose the transmission through the axon, and it stops or it has a saltatory conduction. So after this happens, there is, the slowness of conduction, and that impairs the message that is transmitted through the nerve, right? Now, a good thing is that after the demyelination, some oligodendrocytes survive. So then remyelination can occur, but it's not as before. So that's why we have some impairments that get better, but not, as good as before. Now, let's just take that a little deeper and then let's review. If we bring back the name multiple sclerosis, right? So at the beginning I said multiple sclerosis means multiple scars. So there is, again, myelin lost and replaced with gliosis, which is pretty much scars, okay? So there's no transmission or very little transmission through these gliotic scars. And there's multiple areas of these gliotic scars /plaques /sclerosis. So again, Sclerosis is just dead tissue. So multiple sclerosis, multiple areas of plaques, multiple areas of sclerosis or gliosis, okay? Now, when we talk about relapse or attacks, exacerbation, what does that mean? So when someone has an attack, what happens is that an attack, it's pretty much a demyelinating event, an acute demyelinating event. Something's wrong in your central nervous system. So then, as I said, there's destruction of oligodendrocytes, but there's survival of some oligodendrocytes. So when we're talking about the type of MS like relapse remitting, those oligodendrocytes that survive remyelinate, as I said before. And that's the reason behind recovery, because there's remyelination occurring, okay? Now, the other construct that the last two is that is autoimmune. What does that mean? So, okay, here it is. You've heard about the blood-brain barrier, right? So think about the blood-brain barrier as your, like when you, this is going to be a silly analogy, but like when you go to a bar, you know, there's a guy like the bouncer asking for your ID, and you know, it's like, okay, you go in, and then if there's someone who's underage, they're not going to go in, right? So this is pretty much the blood-brain barrier. It's your bouncer or however you call it. So it's in like, it's a layer, semi-permeable layer of cells within the capillaries of the nervous system. And this layer pretty much says, you enter, you don't enter, you pretty much, you're not going to enter ever. Yes, come in, no, stop. Okay. So blood-brain barrier allows oxygen, allows nutrients, allows happy things that will be good for our brains. But somehow in MS, the blood-brain barrier is not functioning right. Like those bouncers that let the underage kids go in, and then they go in the bar, and then they're all excited and they create a mess in the bar because they get so drunk, right? So I know it's a silly one, but you trust me, you will remember this because of that analogy. So blood-brain barrier allows B cells and T cells and immune cells to cross when they're not supposed to cross. And those B cells attack the myelin. And they think the myelin is a virus. So then the myelin is attacked and you have a demyelinating disease. So this is autoimmune disease. Now, the last construct is that it's inflammatory. When there's destruction of myelin, there's cytokines around because there's destruction, and cytokines cause inflammation. So pretty much inflammation is what causes the problem in MS, okay? So now let's talk about the diagnosis. So you cannot diagnose MS through just history or like your symptoms, because they're so variable that you just cannot tell anybody, oh, you have MS. No, there's some diagnosis criteria called the McDonald criteria. And these are 4 things that I like to remember, like what you usually have in a McDonald's meal, which is your burger. I don't eat a McDonald's, but you know, when I was a kid, I would. So burger, fries, drink, and ice cream, because I love ice cream. Okay, so 4 things that the doctor will check before they diagnose MS. 1, there will be evidence of 2 spatially distinct attacks. So that means 2 areas of the body or 2 regions on the body should be affected. For example, the vision and sensory in one arm, sensory problems. Okay, so 2 areas of the body. The second one is temporally distinct attacks. So that means that the symptoms must be separated within 6 months of each other. Okay, so I had problems with my vision, and then a couple of months later, 6 months later or more, Now I have altered sensation on my hand or my arm, okay? Third, which is our SOTA, it's lab evidence of 2 or more lesions on the MRI, or lab evidence on the CSF, or evoked potentials. So when they're talking about MRI, they're looking for something that's called the gadolinium lesions. And gadolinium is just what they use to be able to see a new lesion, okay? And then they use T2 weighted scans to see older lesions. Now, this might sound like, what is she talking about? So when you do an MRI, there's T1 or T2 weighted scans. And this is just like how the MRI looks. Like, you know, the MRI, you can see black and you can see gray or white, depends. So a T1 scan will detect new lesions. T2 will detect older lesions. So here for the McDonald criteria, you know, you need the evidence of 2 distinct lesions. So in this case, we would see the new one and the old one. The new one with gadolinium enhanced and the old one with T2. For the CSF, what they're looking for is elevated IgG, okay, which immunoglobulins G, or they're looking for oligoclonal bands. And that is just pretty much destroyed oligodendrocytes. So that's what they're looking for in the CSF, which is obtained through a lumbar puncture, okay? And then the fourth one, which is our ice cream, is exclusion of other better explanations for that clinical features, okay? All right, we're moving on to our finish line. So the last thing I want to talk about is, which I already mentioned, the attacks and the something that's called a pseudo attack. So an attack, again, we hear this a lot: MS, relapse, MS, attack, MS, exacerbation. So what does that mean? That is just an acute demyelinating event. Something's going wrong with the central nervous system. There is neurologic disturbances that last for at least 24 hours, for at least 24 hours, not max 24 hours, okay? Now, a pseudo attack, it's in an acute period of neurologic disturbance that is transient. So this one's brought on by fatigue, by stress, by elevated core temperature, by infection, by anything that will stress the system will cause worsening of symptoms, but this one is not demyelinating. A lot of people with MS, if they exercise, the core temperature will rise and they might experience a worsening of symptoms, and they will say, you know, I'm getting worse. But this is transient. It will stop once you go back to baseline. So if your patients, sometimes when they're exercising, they start feeling sick or, you know, worse, just exercise will not create an exacerbation. This is a pseudo attack. And just don't confuse these two, because the attack, it's really worsening that can last a long time, even if, you know, you don't exercise or stop exercising, or, you know, it's a out of nowhere worsening. And pseudo attack, it's a transient event that's not demyelinating. All right, so I really hope you enjoyed this intro video, and those are mainly the big things. I know I didn't talk about the types of MS. We will later. Very, very superficial. I'm not going to touch a lot on the types of MS. There is a lot of information in the website, MS Association, if you want to just, you know, take a look at relapse remitting, secondary progressive, primary progressive, all those types of MS. And I will see you next time in our next video.